Hey there, today I'm going to show you how I made this majestic Viking rune leather journal with exposed binding. Okay, so we're going to start this lovely bookbinding adventure with some basic paper folding. Take some 8.5 by 11 inch paper and fold it in half. Wonderful! Even a trained monkey can do this, and I'm one well-trained monkey. Now stack a few of those folded sheets together, let's say 5 or 6, to make a signature. This is a fancy word for a group of pages in a book. I started with 6 signatures and ended up with 5, but we'll get to that later. Once you have your stack of perfectly folded signatures, we are going to measure the width, length, and height to let us know how much cowhide we need. Now go into your spouse's leather stash and secretly carve off the size you need. After all, this journal is secretly for them. Shh. So they won't mind. My slice was around 12 inches long and 9 inches wide. Then take that smaller piece of leather and make sure all of your edges are nice and even and square. I used my craft mat as a guide and trimmed off some of the wonky edges. Then test the fit to make sure everything is hunky-dory before moving on. I selected a wonderful Viking design that I wanted to cut out of the cover of the journal. This design is called Vegvisir and is a Viking compass. I test cut a scrap piece of leather to ensure I wasn't going to ruin my carefully cut stolen piece of leather. The leather I'm using is vegetable tan and rather thick. My die cutting Cricut machine barely cut through it, so here are some handy tips if you want to try this. Number 1. Use a strong grip mat so the leather stays put. Number 2. Use a deep cut blade. Careful, it's a sharp boy. Number 3. Set your cutting pressure to more. Number 4. Put tape on the back of the leather to prevent an unholy mess of leather bits being permanently stuck to your mat. Number 5. After aligning your leather on the mat, make sure you change the orientation of the design you are cutting to match. Otherwise, you'll be really disappointed. Then sit back and watch the magic happen. Maybe have some tea, or coffee, or a beer, depending on your mood. Lovely! Except for these marks. These, right here. But we'll get to that later. Now enjoy the simple pleasure of peeling the leather off the mat. Easy peasy. And then peeling the tape off the leather. Nice. Despite my best efforts, the leather didn't get cut all the way through. I have a Cricut Explorer Air too. If you're a fancy and you have a Cricut Maker, you probably won't have this issue. Or will you? Anyway, take the leather and your trusty knife and just cut through any remaining areas of the leather that didn't get cut all the way through. Fantastic. Now we're going to tidy up our piece a bit more before dyeing this bad boy. By this time, my husband caught wind of my little project and demanded rounded corners, so that it'll wear better. So my trusty knife and I set to work rounding corners with the help of a Canadian dime. Then I sanded the edges to make it look like a toddler didn't make it. And beveled the edges using a number 2 beveler. I think that's what that's called. There were some unsightly stringy bits left over from the Cricut, so I sanded those off because I decided being covered in leather dust was a fashion statement I wanted to make that day. Remember those horrible little roller imprints that my Cricut machine made as it was cutting? Well, here's the part where I attempt to fix that. I spritz the leather with water and use a leather tool to press them out, or attempt to. I wish hindsight was 20/20 because I would have left them. You'll see in a moment what I'm talking about. It's time to dye. As I said, by this time my husband knew of my little project for him and made another demand. Green dye. I took a little wool dauber and slathered the Pro Dye all over the cover, finishing off with 3 coats to get an even coverage. And because of this unsightly blemish, yes, that right there, that was the result of me trying to fix the utter carnage my Cricut machine made to the surface of the leather as it cut. So let's just cover that up. Then I dyed the edges, got in all the nooks and crannies around the cover design as well. Clearly not caring my head is in your way, sorry about that. Then I slapped on 2 coats of dye to the back side. It's burnishing time. Woo! Yes, it's burnishing time. I gooped some Gum Tragacanth on the edges with my finger and rubbed it in with the proper tool, Bernie the Burnisher. Yes, that's what I'm calling him. Ooh, smooth. At this point, I wanted to fix a slight oversight with my design choice. I cut out a square of black cotton just large enough to fit around the cover design. Then I used pinking shears on the edges of the cotton to prevent fraying. My goal here was to give the cover something to adhere to so the edges of the inside of the design stay down. Anyway, despite carefully marking off the area with wax paper, this is another one of those hindsight is 2020 moments, by the way, because I should have used masking tape. Because spray adhesive is OP, and I had to use my hand to hold the sheets down. It's also probably the most difficult kind of glue to get off your skin, by the way. At least the kind I use because it remains tacky for a long time afterwards. Seriously, my hands were raw from washing them. Also, look at that. It gummed up the cover. Ew. Don't worry though, it does come off. It's buffing time. Oh yes it is. Now we're going to make the cover nice and shiny. This will also help blend in some of those imperfections from our dye job. Resolute. Just a little bit. Not too much. Truly, just use a little bit. My last leather working project almost ended in disaster because I tipped way too much out onto my paper towel applicator. You can check out that project in the cards if you dare. Oh, thank the gods we've reached the part where I sew the signatures to the cover to turn this green bad boy into an actual book. I made a template to indicate where the stitches would go and marked lines across the spine of the signatures at these locations using the template. I found the center of the cover and marked where it was using a pencil to help me line up the center of my template later. I decided how many holes I could fit into the half-inch width of the book spine that I determined at the beginning when I made the initial measurements of the signature. I decided I could only fit 5 holes, not 6, as I had planned. So I divided up all the paper to only have 5 signatures instead of 6. I squared off the edge using a ruler and my trusty craft knife. Then I sanded it down so it looked less like garbage. And rounded all of the corners, because remember how we wanted rounded leather corners? Well, now the pages needed to be rounded too, or they wouldn't fit properly. Now get rid of some of that pent-up aggression by punching holes in all the signatures on the marks you made earlier using the template. Ah, that feels better. Now for the moment of truth, friends. Cross your fingers and toes because we're about to permanently scar our cover we worked so hard on. Clamp the template to the cover, lining it up in the center marks we made earlier. You can protect the front with a scrap sheet of paper between the clamp and cover. Use the awl to poke holes where indicated on the template. You also want to make sure you have an even number of holes per signature. I have 4. Look at that! I didn't ruin it! What luck! It's binding time, friends! I used a variation of the exposed stitch binding technique shown in making handmade books. I use wax thread and a straight needle. You'll need the length of your book times as many signatures you have. I always add about 1 more to make sure I have enough, so I use my book length times 6. Pick up the cover and go through from the outside to inside into the first hole. Leave a 3 to 4 inch tail for finishing. Pick up the first signature and go through the first hole. Sew in and out the remaining holes of the signature, going through the corresponding hole of the cover as you do so, as seen here. The leather made it really difficult to pull the needle through, so I employed a pair of pliers to help me not stab myself. When you get to the end, sew into the next line of holes of the cover. Join a new signature and sew to the end of that signature, sewing through the second hole of each row of cover holes as you do so. Tighten the thread when you reach the end. Tuck the end under the thread before entering the third row of holes and joining the next signature. When you get to the end of this row, make a kettle knot by going under the thread between the first and second holes and back through itself before sewing into the third hole. Add a new signature and sew to the end and make another kettle stitch by sewing under the thread between the second and third holes and through that loop before sewing into the fourth hole. Continue sewing like this until you reach the end of the last signature. When you sew out the last hole, make another kettle stitch. Then sew back into the last hole of the cover. Sew back into the last hole of the signature and tie a double knot before trimming the end. To finish the remaining end, thread the tail on the needle. And I just completed a kettle knot here before sewing back into the cover. Then instead of using a knot inside of the signature, I used a curved needle to help me loop the thread around the stitch between the signature and the cover before tying a knot and cutting the end. Look at that! An exposed binding! And I didn't completely ruin it! Yay! And we're finished our lovely bookbinding adventure. I hope you enjoyed this fantastic journey as much as I did. You made it this far, so I hope that's a yes. My name is Pam, and this has been Total Pamarchy, the craft channel with a little anarchy. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button so we can hang out next time. Until then, have an amazing day, and we'll see you later. Bye!